Previously on Battlestar Galactica.
Hi, I'm Ronald D. Moore, executive producer, Battlestar Galactica.
I'm David Eick, exec producer of Battlestar Galactica.
And I'm Michael Rymer, the director of the pilot and the first episode of the first season of Battlestar Galactica.
And this is the first episode of the first season. It's called 33, which refers to the amount of time that elapses in between all the silent attacks.
All right, we can take 3 more people.
This episode conceptually began very early in the development of the first season. I wrote up a short list of potential storylines that we would play in the first year, and one of those log lines was the fleet jumps every 33 minutes because the Cylons relentlessly are pursuing them and the crew gets no sleep. And that's just sort of one-line description and kind of caught everybody's attention. We all kind of sparked to it. And I think David and I decided at some early point that that was probably the best way to kick off the season. And there was never really a story document developed for this particular episode, actually. I wrote this episode over Christmas break before the series was actually officially picked up. And I just dived in and started writing it. And as a result, it was one of the more fun projects that I wrote all the first season. There was something really interesting and freeing about just sitting down with the blank page and just starting without having the entire sort of roadmap worked out, which typically is the process. And
because we had thwarted the system, basically, I'd taken a brief sabbatical to the studio that was making the show, and so I was able to say to Ron, yeah, go ahead, good idea. And no one really...
That's right, you were my studio.
No one really had any hoops to jump through, so Ron was able to dive in. I think the best part about this is that it's a standalone concept. You don't really need to have seen the miniseries to get into this whole very unusual idea about the Cylons returning every 33 minutes, which, by the way, we never explain.
No, and I love that. I also just like the idea conceptually that we just would start the series off in the middle of a crisis without explanation, that the miniseries ends in a very positive place on the Galactica where they've all escaped the Cylon attack, and Adama has promised they're going to go find Earth, and he makes the deal with Laura, and you definitely end on this up note. And then you go away for a very long time, and when you start the series, you kind of expect them to be cruising along, much like you left them, and then something bad happens. And I thought there was something much more intriguing and interesting to just say that actually, while you, the audience, were away, really bad things have been happening, and now we're 5 days in, and it's really gotten even worse than it has before.
That was pretty exciting when I got the script. It was the first time I'd ever done an episode of TV, and the first time I'd ever actually had to say yes to a job without ever reading the script. And I was excited, but I read this thing, and it was playing so far past what I had, as a writer, assumed would happen. It was very exciting. And then also Hilo. Finding Hilo alive on Caprica, there was a real thrill for me.
And it was also, I think, the silver bullet in getting the network to agree to pick up a series, because their biggest concern about whether or not Battlestar Galactica could work as an ongoing series was that we not fall victim to the same trappings of space opera as we'd seen it over and over again in the various Star Treks and Andromedas and Stargates and so forth. That how will this look different? How will it feel different? And so there were 2 key concepts that really contributed to ensuring not just the network but ourselves that we could do a so-called space opera that would have a visual aesthetic that would just break it apart from any of those. One being going inside of Baltar's mind into his house, the house that he lived in before the destruction of Caprica, and suddenly being swept away by these blue skies and this incredible beach vista, and not the kind of imagery you're used to seeing on a space opera at all. And then, as Michael was just saying, to be able to go back to Caprica, nuclear rain-swept, ugly, horrible Caprica, but an exterior nonetheless, and see this lone man running for his life were 2 key ideas that I think got the network to finally say, okay.
There was also a little bit of a gauntlet being laid down in this episode, in that it was really hard to follow and complex. And I think, I don't know if it was a conscious decision or it just sort of evolved, that you guys decided we were going to live with that difficulty, which I think paid off.
Yeah, we would just step in, say to the audience, okay, pick it up, follow along, because we're not going to really lead you by the hand.
We're going to challenge you. We're going to make you think and work.
And to their credit, the network always sort of supported that. They never really pushed us to completely unwind this and make it coherent.
Yeah, and because I think they had this, Bonnie Hammer from the beginning always had, I think, the right kind of concern about this show, which was, again, gee, haven't we seen this kind of thing over and over again? And so that it was an area in which I think the three of us and the network, in maybe an unusual way, because you're always hearing about creator and network conflict, were kind of in lockstep from the organism, which was to say, how do we break this outside of the trappings of the genre? And it helped when you had an idea like this because you knew you were contributing to what their agenda was as well.
There are limits.
This business became quite controversial, however, because we found ourselves trying to tell the story about this man who sees this woman in his head. And by the time we got into the fine cutting, you find yourself going, okay, well, his eyes are open here, but he still sees her, but his eyes are closed later and he doesn't see her. And so how do we...
Yeah, there was endless, tedious discussions.
Trying to balance when he goes into his head to the house versus when he sees her in his present state. And it was an interesting
And I think our instinct was always that the battle becomes our saying, look, the audience is smart. They're going to pick this stuff up. They watch TV all the time. They know that sometimes there's a convention when a character sees a character that other people don't, and that's not really new under the sun. And you don't really have to lead them by the hand. And then you're balancing that with sort of the network's desire to be inclusive and that you don't alienate new viewers and that they understand what's going on. Because the biggest fear of any television network is the dreaded remote control, that the audience tunes in and goes, what? Oh, who's that? Okay, I don't get it. What's on the other channel? And they just click you off without a chance.
And they have a history, certainly a Sci-Fi Channel, of shows that maybe started out doing very well, but then tapered off as they went along because they became too inside, or as Ron calls it, too inside baseball, like Farscape, which is used often as an example of a show that started out being very sort of broad-based and having a lot of accessibility and mass appeal, and then kind of evolving into this thing that was being made for the 9 people who never missed an episode. And so, yeah, it's an ongoing battle with the network to allow us to leave things a little bit more esoteric or to be more subtle with things. At the same time, even amongst ourselves, and Michael certainly is a voice in this camp as often as anyone, saying, let's not get too cute. Let's not get too cool for the room. Let's remember that the thing has to resonate. And if it's only resonating to us and to our 9 best fans, we haven't won.
Our editor on this, Danny Cooper, is tremendously talented.
Oh yeah, using heads and tails of scenes before Michael called action just to get a piece of...
Virtually none of this is as scripted. I mean, the script is a little bit more schematic in terms of, you're cutting between these people and sort of, it's very impressionistic, and then, Michael takes it and directs it, but then the editor is really the one who's putting these pieces together. And in a tease like this, it's all about how you cut it. And Danny deserves an enormous amount of credit for this.
And Danny actually was brought to... Danny's another non-episodic talent in our midst, because she actually was Michael's editor on his film Angel Baby and Queen of the Damned, and so
everything I've ever done.
Everything yeah. That's maybe not such a good thing. You probably want to branch out a little bit.
Force him to work.
Danny, you're fired. But I think she really brings a cinematic perspective to this as well, and like Ron's saying, goes for rhythms that are very unusual and just has a storytelling sense.
She's like a jazz player. She cuts off the beat, off the tune.
I remember her saying to me at one point, this show is all about the backs of people and their hands. That's what this show is. It's all of this sort of, being outside the moment.
And she knows when to hold a beat longer, just to let a feeling seep through. And
it's really interesting because it's such an enormous skill, and it's so important to film or television is editing it, and it's often just something that's overlooked.
I think most of the time that's because, and we've all done, or certainly Ron and I have done shows before this, there tends to develop in a lot of circumstances like a television series, a political environment where people like to kind of walk around post-production suites telling each other how brilliant they are. And it's nice, I think, to have someone like Danny help set the tone, where I'll come into an editing room saying to Danny, gee, isn't episode 7, which she may or may not be cutting, great? And she'll look at me like I'm smoking crack, and you go, oh, that's right, we have someone honest.
It's all about keeping really high standards on the show. We're trying to make this as much like a feature as we can, which is difficult, given...
I think that feeling kind of permeates the production. I know that, the crew and the production staff in Vancouver are just tremendously dedicated to the show and just, really try to lift it into something that's not just a piece of television.
Well, even this business right here, I remember Michael and I on the set talking about Nicholas Roeg and this little moment here.
This is one of my favorite scenes.
Where he cuts himself and just... the, I guess, foreshadowing, if you will, of, Adama cutting himself and the sort of horror that's going to ensue. And it was nice.
For you movie buffs out there, we're referring to a film called Don't Look Now with Donald Sutherland, who cuts himself shaving, I believe.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite
bits. But then he gets his throat cut at the end of the show. So.
This whole little thing here where, Ty was eating his noodles and sitting on the jacket. It just gives you such a great sense of texture to the world.
Double check your undercarriage before...
This business here is a good point to mention Stephen McNutt, our director of photography, who did not shoot the miniseries. Joel Ransom, who did a sensational job in the miniseries, wasn't available to us, and I'd worked with Steve McNutt on a CBS show from several years ago called American Gothic, and Steve had moved into a new medium called high def, basically, which is not film. It's basically a digital form of tape, which is what we're shooting the series on. We shot the miniseries on 35mm film, but this that you're watching right now is shot on high def, and Steve has something of a black belt in the medium, and so really sort of brought us into this, and we were all terrified, and we did 1,000 tests, and as you can see, the density and the texture of the look is every bit as rich as film. They're certainly close enough for television, for a television screen, and really gave us some new options, actually, that we didn't have with the film.
Can you check it again for me, please? Yeah. Please get somebody starting.
This little walk across the hangar bay, it's a very small little moment, but it's the kind of thing that, to me, really define what the show is. It's these little human moments in between all the drama and all the action that really makes the series work for me, in the same way that, Adama shaving is a key thing in this episode. And I think one of the early learning curves that we went through in Season 1 was trying to figure out, A, how long the scripts should be.
Because the first cut of this was about 10 minutes long.
Yeah, the first cut of this was very, very long.
Yeah, because those beats are often...
and those are the first things you usually cut. And so, but we were really determined not to cut the humanity out of the show. So as a result, that simple walk across the hangar bay became this sort of like bright line. We're not cutting the walk across the hangar.
You're right. It was a rallying cry because, we were really having difficulty cutting story material and plot material, which is verboten in TV.
Yeah.
To preserve stuff like noodles and jackets and aimless walking across hangar bays. And it was really... It's funny. I don't even remember us necessarily having a conversation about it. It was just this unanimous instinct, this reflex we were all kind of driven by.
Sorry.
Colony?
This is another beat here, too, where this actor playing Sisinus, my very good friend,
Alonzo, who we've now killed.
Yes, who we've now killed. He gives her a great little look at the end of this. And again, when you're looking for seconds, fractions of seconds to get the thing down to time, you would cut a moment like this, where he looks up at him.
Yeah. And this, too.
We were this was gone forever.
We kept thinking we were going to have to cut this whole piece, and I was so in love with this particular piece of walking down the room of photographs.
Although Michael wouldn't shoot this pickup, I had to get it later.
Yes.
With my boys there in the frame.
David's children are there as people who are dead. So, take from that what you
said,
will.
No, I will not shoot that.
And this, too. I mean, we tailed this all the way out. I really wanted this to go all the way to Douala, getting all the way to the end and turning and looking around and just playing the moment. And as a result, there's scenes that were cut. I mean, there's an entire scene that was also really nice in the bathroom, in the head, where you see all the pilots are wrecked and exhausted. And there was some funny little exchange between Starbuck and Apollo. Things like that.
Laura getting the picture.
Laura getting the picture that we make a deal of. That, you see the pilots touching that photograph in the ready room, and Laura gets a copy of it, and it's explained what it is. And we just chose to completely lose that little bit of plot and detail because we wanted this other tone.
And, the reason why you go through all this agony is because people, and I don't just mean people at the network, because there was certainly enough questioning even amongst ourselves, you start asking, well, how much of this will the audience hang with you for? Again, it's that line of, are we getting too groovy? Are we getting too cool for the room? And what's telling is that with all these little beats that we're talking about, and the noodles and the jacket and the shaving, and then you get into the commerce of it, you look at the ratings, ratings once this thing aired, there was nothing but build throughout the entire episode. We didn't lose anybody. No one bailed. No one got bored. No one said, oh, gee, nothing's blowing up. I'm changing the channel. That's, I think, encouraging to the extent that it says that the audience for this show is as smart as we hope they'd be.
And they managed to sit through 18 minutes of ads.
Yeah, in between, exactly.
Do you want children, guys?
And this is a classic bit of Danny's editing. It's just to hang in the shot. It's not to come out and do, a little more traditional coverage on Baltar. We just stay here. Baltar's out of focus through most of this. It's sort of disturbing and a little bit more subjective. And again, it's one of the things that makes the show interesting to watch.
I think this was a happy accident that originally this was happening in the house. Yes. And I had staged it to have them having sex while they're talking, which was too much.
Too much, I remember that, yeah.
But luckily, we just overlapped the coverage here, thinking we might cut between them and saved our asses.
Well, I think that was also something I think you started to do here, was we just started covering her in both places and everywhere, because we never quite knew where we wanted her to be and not be.
Ed requested to speak with the president. Dr. Rymer, I can see.
You know.
I love looking at the hairstyles change over the season.
Yeah. As much as anything, I think sort of struggles that we had in terms of managing all aspects of the process, making the network happy, etc., involved the look of these people. I mean, it's the premiere episode. Typically, you're under a microscope. Everyone has to look beautiful. Everyone has to look perfect. And we've got this story about people who are completely ragged, haven't slept for 5 days, and are going to look their absolute worst, as bad as you can possibly make them look. So you can imagine when the dailies were coming in, the phone calls started coming, going, wait a minute. And we're saying, well, gee, guys, you know, we all read the script. We all knew that they were going to look pretty bad.
Well, the actors took it very seriously. Remember, Eddie was like, he stayed up, I don't know how long, actually, before he started shooting.
He had a plan. We're going to stay up for 4 days.
He wanted the entire cast to stay up, no sleep.
No.
Well, no, and there's a lot of stuff that's cut out of Eddie gagging and retching because he had read somewhere that when
he would have so much acid reflux that he would be keeling over. Exactly. So in the middle of a scene, you suddenly see him grimace, and like he's been poisoned or funny stuff.
This whole storyline, I mean, the Hilo thing that starts here and continue throughout the season, was something we struggled with for quite a while to sort of find the rhythm of it. How many scenes you shoot on Caprica per episode? What was the nature of that story? How long would it take to play itself out? But I think in the end, it became one of the more intriguing elements of Season 1, and it was so unusual to do this kind of a tale that, I mean, this B story has zero relationship to whatever A story is going on aboard Galactica all season long, and it's kind of a brave choice to really be able to do that.
I don't know that our Silent Centurions ever looked better than they
this
did
is a
in
great
this
sequence for
episode.
And this was the worst day this crew ever had. Our crew's sort of like the crew of the Galactica.
This was day one, wasn't it?
Yes.
They're hugely talented, and they've got huge personalities, and collectively we're all incredibly dysfunctional. But somehow we get through the days.
Somehow.
And it works, so let's not fix it. But boy, half the crew here had never been on the show before, and it was our worst hour. But look at it.
Look at that. That's just tremendous work. That is so good.
I thought you needed explosive rounds to kill the Silent.
That was an explosive round.
That was a very small explosive.
Yeah, small, tiny explosive rounds.
Tiny explosive.
I should mention Michael directed the first 2 episodes of Season 2, which we just concluded, and we're now in the middle of the editing process on. So we may intermittently here make little jabs at each other to underscore certain points of view.
Yeah, we're still cutting that episode, and we're all worrying about, does it have the same degree of novelty? And because you're so obliged to deliver on all the threads, there's so much work to do.
This little scene, Eddie did a great little ad-lib in this scene that ultimately we ended up cutting. But
sorry we cut it.
Eddie ad-libbed as he was walking along. He's reading all the problems and so many cases of exhaustion, so many cases of this, and then he just said 10 suicides. And looked over at Ty, and it was just grim. It was so grim. Yeah. I mean, it was perfect. It was so perfect. But this episode, the gigantic controversy we had on this episode was, is this too dark? Is it too dark and too bleak and so depressing that no one will ever watch this show again?
Yeah, they may get this wonderful artistic experience, like a Dostoevsky novel or something, but will they then avoid it like the plague thereafter because it's so upsetting?
So Eddie's suicides became one of the bones we threw to, okay, well
fine, we'll cut that.
Cut the suicides.
What the hell does that mean?
This is one of your favorite scenes.
This is one of my favorite scenes of the whole season, just because it captures that reality, the spontaneity of what actually happens between them. It felt very real, and I think this is, as you were saying about all the ad-libs, this is where the show lives. You guys allow the actors to find
because
that stuff.
this beat right here coming up, where the yelling and confrontation turns to laughter, was not scripted at all. I mean, this is something that came up on the stage between the director and the actors, and they kind of go for it. And I love that. It's one of the things I love about the show, is that, the script is important. The script is a blueprint. You can't really say the script doesn't matter, but you get down to the stage and it has to live and the characters have to come alive, and it's really a tribute to the show, how much of the material is elevated down on the stage by the actors and the directors.
Well, yeah, getting back to the idea of trying to maintain sort of a refreshingly honest and self-critical environment on the show where, we don't walk around telling ourselves we're geniuses. We walk around asking ourselves how we can make it better and criticizing ourselves.
What?
Here's another...
This is another ad-lib. Aaron just...
That's great. That's just so great.
But, for example, many television shows operate under a very strict pretense or set of rules that the script is king. And I think both Ron and I, because when Michael's not around, we're dealing with other directors, and we have to probably impose more discipline or limitations on some of the other folks. But
because I've spent all the money.
Because Michael spent all the money. But I think both Ron and I come from being movie lovers first, and really having, images of great movies and references that we like to use a lot. And so whether Ron's coming at it as a writer, I'm coming at it as a producer, I think both of us are all about making the moments work, and sometimes that comes from script and sometimes it doesn't, and there isn't a lot of politics involved in that, which is rare in TV.
This is more sort of our signature kind of, interesting oblique shots in space, not giving you the traditional hero kind of arrivals, and sort of, Gary Hutzel and Zoic and all the other people in visual effects department add a tremendous amount to this show, and we sit through lots of sessions with them doing previs visuals for us and agonizing over lots of choices, but ultimately they really deliver something that matches the mood inside the ship, which I think is
which was a change. Because in the miniseries we didn't shoot the sets as ropey, as they call it, as handheld or as much in a verite style, because we weren't sure to what extent we could approximate that quality in the CG. And then when we realized how well Gary and the people at Zoic could execute this handheld documentary style as a sort of synthetic reality in space, that allowed Michael, when we all came back to do the series, to go further in that direction here.
Well, you guys really pushed me. I was actually a little resistant. I think for this episode it was perfect. And as it turned out, things calmed down a little bit. So you sort of mixed it up more.
Episode 2, I think, wasn't sure.
Episode 2 is too shaky cam.
Yeah.
It's too overt in episode 2. But that's the learning curve. You have to figure out how it fits.
It depends on the episode, I think, somehow, or even where you are.
The episode we just shot has flashbacks, which Michael went for a very sort of elegant, a lot of dollies, a lot of steady cam, just a much more kind of elegant look to it, because that suits that particular episode. But I think generally the show likes to live in a zone where the essence of it is about reality, and is about believing that what you're seeing is legitimate and real and not a fantasy or an adventure.
And that goes to what the scene that we just watched, and this next one, in terms of the reality of it. One of the things I really liked about the show is the sort of uncompromising quality of it. That scene where Duwala makes a small mistake, and they come down on her pretty hard and pretty directly, And at the end of it, Adama just says, we make mistakes and people die. Now carry on. There's nobody to let her off the hook. There's nobody that goes and puts an arm around Duwala and says it's okay. And
gives her a puppy.
And Duwala just sucks it up and keeps going. And these guys do too. Laura just changes the number on that board and keeps going. And that's one of the things I just love about the show.
Dr. Amra.
My favorite part of the show was those octagonal pieces of paper with the corners missing. Yes, I think that trumps everything.
Somehow it's become our signature.
I started thinking about those things in the whiteboard we just on. I'm thinking, gosh,
shouldn't the whiteboard be missing corners?
Yeah.
Well, just how hard it is to approximate a parallel culture. And whenever we go to Caprica, we're always struggling with the signage and the did they have billboards? Did they have Good Morning Caprica? All those sorts of questions.
Well, we're talking with Rod Hardy, one of your colleagues who directed Act of Contrition last season, about coming back to direct the episode in which we go into Laura's memory and see Caprica the day before the attack.
You can have that one.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of effort and detail.
There is no goal.
So James Callis is sort of the, I guess you could say, the color commentary of Battlestar Galactica. He's sort of our John Madden. He gives you this pinball quality every time you cut to his storyline. It's a completely different energy, and I think one of the secret weapons of the show. Although don't tell him that.
Yeah, don't tell him. James, turn this off.
Yeah.
He knows.
This sort of repetitive nature of the storyline is really what I think really makes it structurally work, because the plot as such is relatively simple. The Cylons chase them, they jump away. The Cylons chase them, they jump away. The Cylons don't chase them, and then the Cylons do chase them, and then we have a whole confrontation. And that's really the entire plot. There's not like big stretches of time trying to figure out how we avoid the Cylons and how could this be and coming up with a techno-gag to stop them. I mean, it's a very simple story, but structurally the repetitive nature of what's happening to them and the strung-out quality of everyone involved in the show builds this tension throughout. I kind of knew conceptually going in that you had this sort of riff going, that the loop and the sort of repetitive nature of the show was going to drive it into tighter and tighter circles. But I was really surprised at how well it came out and just how you really feel the experience with these people. And by the time you get to this point, when they didn't actually follow the Cylons, there is a weird sense of relief and free fall, and you're not quite sure where we're going at this point. It's a little too early in the show for it to be all over, and you kind of know they're coming back again, but you're not quite sure how this could be.
Although, when we finally get to the point where these storylines do converge and you start to understand that there is a kind of logic to it, that there's something meaningful behind the attacks, we get into an area that was probably the most controversial with this show, which is how do you deal with a situation where you may have to kill a certain number of innocent people to protect the many. And certainly every day in the paper we just had a situation with a plane flying over the White House and how close that plane came to being shot down, because we live in a culture where sometimes innocent people are unwitting pawns in a greater attack, and those kinds of decisions have to be made. And this is the discussion that we find ourselves in a lot. And so that became, I guess you could say, the most controversial aspect of this episode, because do you have your hero actually do that? Do you push your hero to that point?
And it was scripted. We shoot in the script and as shot. At the end, that's coming up, when Lee fires on the Olympic carrier, he sees the faces in the windows. He flies by the side of the ship, he looks in, and he sees the passengers looking back at him. And when I wrote it, I wanted it to be that strong. I wanted it to be clear that they were making this decision in full awareness of the consequences of it. I didn't want it, again, it was the uncompromising nature of the show that I wanted to emphasize. I didn't want to find an easy way out for them. I didn't want to find an excuse for them to hang their hats on. I wanted them to look at this situation squarely and say, that ship is a danger to us, and yes, there are people on board, but we've got to do this terrible thing, and that would be the end of the show. it became an enormous fight. It became this whole thing about the episode being too dark, the series being too dark, people won't tune in. Okay, maybe we won't broadcast this one first. Maybe we'll broadcast this out of order.
Could have been the death
It just
knell.
became this whole thing. So David and I at some point said, okay, we can't lose the war here. Let them win this battle. So we changed the end and cheated, and you'll see now at the end when Lee flies by the Olympic carrier, there's nobody inside, or at least it's not clear if there's anybody inside. You can't see anybody.
Which I always argued was a darker way to go, and I feared that once people who were objecting to what we had saw it, they would realize that it was darker, and I still believe it is. I think we all know that there are innocent people on ships. I mean, we know too well that that's what happens when bad guys get in control of ships. They don't take the people off the ships. They don't take people off the planes. And so when he flies by and sees those darkened windows, to me, I'm more reminded of that horrible truth than if I saw the people's faces in the windows, which may have tipped over into feeling maudlin or manipulative or somehow contrived. And I just believe that it's a darker show without seeing those faces in the windows than when we had it.
Yeah, see, I still miss the faces. I missed the brutality of it because it was a brutal moment. I kind of wanted to feel it. I wanted the audience to really go, well, he's not really going to do it. I mean, if there's people in there, they're going to find a way out. He's going to, oh, wait, no, I see something. You're going to...
Well, if you're watching this on DVD, if you're watching this on DVD and you can slow it down, you'll see.
I know. I was just going to say that.
You'll see. We do have a little movement behind one of the windows
in there
that Mr. Hutzel, our visual effects supervisor,
in one of the windows.
Snuck in for us. So
I think one or two of the windows.
Yeah, and we went back and forth. There were versions of it where it was pretty obvious, and I was saying, no, we can't be that overt with it. But there's
so you can actually see there are people inside the Olympic.
There's a little movement of like a hand closing one of the windows, basically.
There's somebody waving in desperate.
A white flag.
A white flag.
I just have to say, I've forgotten how good the visual effects are in this sequence.
Yeah, they're just excellent. All this plays so well.
Eddie, in this particular scene, really thrilled me every time I watch this sequence. He really finds that balance of playing someone, basically flipping a mental coin and saying, here's what we're going to do.
And never looks back.
Selling that quality of being the commander, having to make that kind of risky call.
He's so in command. I mean, it really is a great thing in the series because you really need somebody to anchor the show at its center. And when Eddie's on the stage, I mean, Eddie's in command. I mean, it's just like the crew and the extras, they all just kind of treat him like he's the commander, and he commands that CIC, boy. I mean, his place.
He has a lot of personal integrity, I think. He just projects.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
An incredibly generous person, and that sort of... People will do anything for Eddie because of that.
I've never seen him say an unkind word to somebody on his set.
By the way, that was a beautiful part of Vancouver. I'll point out to anyone wanting to know where to go to be there. You can go to the West Van. Lions Bay.
Lions Bay. So here comes the much ballyhooed Olympic carrier sequence.
This went through a couple of drafts in editing and on the script too. I mean, besides the question of whether there are people on board, there's also the addendum of, do they detect the nukes on board the Olympic character or not? And there was a version where they didn't detect the nuke, but the ship won't stop. The ship's still coming towards them, and then the Cylons show up, and you got to blow the ship up. And then there was sort of the general feeling, well, they need something, so we put back in the radiological alarm, and okay, it's got a nuke on board, and that seems to amp the stakes up sufficiently, where everybody kind of says, okay, that's enough already. Blow these guys away.
It was also nice to see Lee be the tougher guy with the more metal than Starbuck for a change.
Yeah, I like that too.
That was a sort of refreshing surprise.
Because you really do kind of going in and expect that she's going to be the one. We got to do it, Lee. Come on, Lee. And that Lee will have to sort of,
procrastinate and angst over it.
Mary's reaction to James here is what I really think defines Baltar's character. It's not always just what James does, it's how the people around him react to him. And I think Mary really captures that sense of dealing with someone who's probably crazy, but who you probably should listen to at the same time. And it's a very difficult thing to pull off.
Yeah, because they have to all forget that he's seeing number 6. You know, they have to treat him as if he's just this sort of madman in the room who has something valuable to say.
But a madman who might have something
smart.
of value to contribute, and it's sort of, well, how do you decide, you know?
There were endless discussions in this episode about the friggin' clocks. I remember all that. There was like lots of discussion, the analog clocks, the digital clocks, what were the size of the clocks, the shape of the clocks, how many digital clocks were there versus analog clocks, where were they? Okay, we need another shot of the clocks.
How do we mark
clocks
the
don't
33
match.
minutes?
It
Was
was a
it
33
hand-drawn?
minute
Was it
thing.
stenciled on?
How do you tell the audience 33 minutes has elapsed? Do the clocks work backwards?
Everything was retro,
Yeah.
low-tech, because we could use all that.
Yeah, you could just like keep redoing it.
And to this day, that little clock at Gaeta's station still has 33 marked on it.
Is it really?
That's a good bit of trivia.
Sorry, we should not just be watching the show.
yeah,
We're
no,
sorry.
That was an attempt to try to break out of these cockpit shots.
Yeah.
We were trying to shoot across 2 cockpits. Took hours. Was enormously fussy. We never did it again.
It looks good, though.
It's hard to do the cockpits. I mean, I think everyone has struggled with it, although Michael probably does it better than anybody else does. It's, you know, how do you shoot these guys in fighters and not make them feel like they're sitting on a soundstage?
Well, you want to shoot wide enough to paint in star fields and movement, but then that's money spent on a close-up that could have gone into a visual effect. So it's all
It's also interesting to me how different the actors look in the helmets. That the framing of the helmet and the light really changes sort of the nature of their faces in interesting ways. It's really interesting. Their facial features just look really different in those cockpit shots, which kind of gives it a different world, which I think is kind of interesting. Whenever they're out in space doing their thing, it's like they've gone to this other place.
It's that visor shape. It's an unusual shape. It protrudes and it's very concave, I guess is the word. And so it distorts the shape of people's faces.
Yeah, and the light kind of throws an odd shadow in here.
Well, in the Mini, we had every light color-coded to try and distinguish people, but that actually didn't work, and we ended up flattening them out. And I think we were still fussing with it in the first episode.
We've gone back to that miniseries look, however, in the second season.
Crashdown developed into an interesting character too. I mean, Crashdown was somebody who had to be Sharon's ECO because Hilo was, you know, still down in Caprica, and we just sort of invented this guy Crashdown in this episode. And as time went on,
going in the second season, he's taken on quite
he's very important in the second season. But Sam Witwer was such an interesting actor, and they had a good chemistry between them, and he just seemed an interesting part of the mix, and we just kept developing him as the year went on.
The problem you want to keep having is we have so many talented people who don't get to do enough.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's frustrating for them, but in a way...
But we've taken care of some of that in the second season already, haven't we?
Well, plus, because you've got a lot of talented young people, you're going to have some attrition. People are going to leave to go on to bigger and better things, and we wish them well and hope that they do that. And we want to kill important characters just to keep people on their toes.
It maintains a sense of real jeopardy.
Yeah. But it's sad to lose Sam.
It is. It's sad.
Well, I guess people, by the time they hear this, will know that. And more to come.
Oh, yes. Not necessarily people you'd be expecting either. Watch carefully here.
Yeah, this is a shot. He looks
see if
over.
we can see it at speed here.
There was right down the lower, and then right there. There's three. Oh, there's 3 of them. There's 3 people on the Olympic carrier.
Somebody's in there.
What are they doing? They're watching TV. They're getting a snack.
I don't think it either they're there or they're all dead. Yeah. So it's doesn't matter.
It only matters in terms of at the end of the show when we go off on Lee's face and he's in the ready room. That scene with his dad.
Oh, it's his
like emotional thing
that,
really, that you want to feel
which Jamie was a little peeved about because he was playing.
He was playing.
Faces.
Yeah, he was playing.
And he
what
saw
really
the cut and went, well.
I always disagreed with him about that. I always thought you're haunted by the event, not literally by Grandpa Joe and the twins, But I know that's what he was playing, for sure. He was imagining the faces.
Lee fires, and then she fires second. I love that.
Ages and ages, all throughout production of, I think, the first 3 or 4 episodes before we finally got into post on this, defining those Viper guns.
Oh.
Back and forth with Jack Levy, sending me these email files with all sorts of variations, and finally settling on this wind-up before they're unleashed.
I never saw that. Somebody made that slow motion.
Yeah, that's it.
What do you mean you never saw
Danny
that?
did that?
I mean, I never recognized
Danny came up with a little slow-mo there at the end to just... Now, this actually, the end here of the Hilo story was something that was so unplotted, it's not even funny. I mean, I was literally writing the teleplay. I'd written the first 2 scenes. I knew he should get captured by 6. And then I was literally in Act 4. I had no idea what the scene was going to be. And 6 is interrogating him. I thought, okay, you were alive. It's a callback to the miniseries. And I had no idea what's supposed to happen next. What's he supposed to do? Is he going to escape? Is it going to be... I was kind of thinking going in that she was just going to haul him off and he was going to be a prisoner into episode 2, and then we'd do an escape or something like that. And then at some point in the scene itself, I thought, well, what would be cool is if Sharon showed up and rescued him. And oh my God, and he wouldn't realize that Sharon's a Cylon. And she grabs him and says, come with me, run, and go off into the forest. And I said, that's great. I have no idea what that means. But clearly something's up.
That's how most of these things... Well, again, it's like, why did the Cylon show up every 33 minutes? Sometimes having no idea what it means is a good thing.
Yeah, it sends you in these really interesting directions. And this became like a major plot thread all season long. And ultimately, this storyline about Sharon and why she's with Hilo and what the Cylons are trying to do, ironically enough,
I don't think we should admit
really...
to any of that. I think we should go back and expunge all that.
and say that it was all a
It
master.
was all on purpose.
It's all part of some very complex...
Actually, when I wrote out the entire 5-season arc of Battlestar Galactica, I knew it would all start right here.
This is the shot that Michael was talking about. This is the very last morsels of light disappearing behind the aircraft.
All that was shot in its face of panicked screaming.
Panic. We're losing the light.
The light's going. Steve did a great job.
That loop line became...
Yeah, that loop line tortures Ron to madness that the network asked us to put in an Adama saying son so that we would understand that they were father and son.
I started putting it in every episode.
Yeah,
You just walk into a scene and go, son.
That doesn't even have to be Adama.
Doesn't even have to be
Sharon
Adama.
says son, sometimes
Son.
number 6 says son.
So we were trying to get Lee to let go of that chip on his shoulder a little bit. We've worked very hard at that over the course of the season. I think Jamie did a great job deepening.
Yeah.
Now, actually, this is not the way the episode ended in the script or in the first couple of cuts. It used to end on the Hilo story down in Caprica, to end on sort of a Jeopardy, to be continued kind of feeling at the end of the show. And then as we were looking through the cut...
And realizing how
unrelenting. It was unrelenting and dark and bleak. And I think it was my idea that felt that, if we just moved this element to the very end and ended the show on the note of the baby being born, that it would add this one final, hopeful beat at the end. And it does. And Mary plays it beautifully. And you come out of the episode after this horrific journey, and just the birth of one child out there is enough to get you a cathartic kind of moment.
I think this is a well-earned upturn.
If you feel like you have earned this.
Yes, the one precious moment of happiness and hope in the episode. Paul Campbell really did a great job here of kind of selling that.
Yeah, he sells it by not overselling it.
Yeah.
Just gives you a little bit. I hate that clock so much.
Why?
I always hated that clock.
Because every time we cut to it, it's that
it would
big
torture me.
gargantuan, harsh numbers, and it just looks bad. Probably one of my favorite little Mary McDonald moments of the season is right here.
Right here. Just as we fade, she does this little, she just goes down and the relief of it all. And that's the end of our episode.
There you go.
Thank you all.
Thanks, y'all.
Mary's actually very. Can I say one more thing? Yeah. Mary's very conscious of, because she's such a sensitive person and has such a rich emotional life, not overplaying it. You know, we're all aware of it in rushes, but she's particularly aware that Laura, as a character, can't afford to get so emotional.
And she's a hottie.
On that note.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, and everyone stay tuned for the R&D TV logo
R&D TV.
done by my high school buddy Jerry Hulch in his garage for 50 cents.
Which are really good.
People are always asking me about.
Do you pre-record these?
Those are all his voices. Goodbye, everyone.